right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for coming and everybody online. Looks like we have the majority of people online today. So this is a meetup for October. I'll go over a few things and then give most of the time to Parker. We've got our Slack as always and the jobs board as always. So if you're looking to either find a job or try to hire somebody, feel free to post. There's a channel for each of those on Slack. If you want to speak here, there is a papercall.io it's for women who go, but it's also for this. And you can also just hit me up or, well, not really Mariah anymore, but you hit me up. I'm Carcinoid on the Forge Utah Slack. And if you have something that you want to talk about, any inkling of an idea of something you think is cool, it doesn't even have to be fancy, just something that you're really interested in, throw it out there. And even if you don't know exactly what you want your talk to look like, hit me up. I'm always happy to help people figure out what talk should look like.
Carson, ask Parker how he came up with his talk.
Parker, how did you come up with your talk?
Because he didn't think he had anything to talk about either.
Yeah, let's do that, because I really think everybody's got something to talk about. They just don't know it.
There were some things that kept happening in our team that pissed me off, and
Drinks just in that fridge over there.
and I wanted to fix them. And so I made a tool to fix them, and then Mariah said, "Why don't you talk about that?" And I said, "There's nothing to talk about." And then she said, "Yes, there is." So then I agreed to talk, and then I wrote 2 more tools, and that's actually what I'm going to be talking about today.
Awesome. Well, there you go. Yep. So like I said, you may not think it's even that interesting, but it probably is. So we're all happy to help, anybody I love first-time speakers, and I'm happy to help them out with that.
And just a side note, CLI tools is one of the most requested topics
Oh, yeah.
I've received.
Well, that goes one of the
I'm just saying from people I talk about. So there you go, Parker. It's always interesting to somebody.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. I think I've built a lot of them. The ability to build static binaries and kind of ship really rich tools as an easy to install and easy to distribute thing is super powerful. The other thing, we got Go West coming up very, very soon, less than 3 weeks. So it's the October 22nd, which is not this Friday, not the next one, but the next one. There are still tickets, as far as I'm aware. Mariah, she's nodding her head.
Love the tickets.
Okay, so and you can come in person here to Weave, or you can do it online. And you're free to do either. Lots of cool speakers. Speaking of, we have an AMA with I forget his name, forgive me.
His name is Michael Matlew.
Michael Matlew?
Yes, he wrote the proposal for Go Workspaces.
Yes.
Which is it's an expansion on dependency management and Go modules.
I like this idea, right? It's to kind of replace the need for like a bunch of swapping in now replaces at the bottom of your Go mods, so you don't have to have just constant commenting and uncommenting of those, which I really appreciate the idea of. So making Go mods more developer friendly. Yeah, if you have any questions, because it's all pre-recorded, because that session with him is pre-recorded, you need to get your questions in now, otherwise you can't really ask him anything during a pre-recorded talk. So that's the link there, and we'll post it probably to Slack as well. That's it. That's all I've got for announcements. I'm going to turn it over to Parker and let him talk about developing CLIs.
Okay, thanks, Carson. Let me override sharing the screen.
I can just stop too.
Can y'all see that?
Yep.
All right. So full disclosure, I actually forgot what I told Mariah the title of the topic would be, so that's why we have 2 different ones. But as I said, I'm Parker Monson. I work at Weave, hence why I'm wearing the hat. They told me I had to rep it. I work in the integrations teams, which is one of their backend teams. I've been with Weave for about 3 years. I'm sorry I can't be with all y'all today. I actually work full-time remote out from Central Illinois. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. I actually am excited to talk about this, but I'm very nervous because it is my first time. So if I say something blatantly wrong, feel free to check a pizza at the projector or something. And if I run over time, Mariah, yell at me. So
Go
Carson is infamous for giving 3-hour talks.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna go over.
We don't stop you for going over.
Well, crap. Okay, then. All right. And actually, if I knew Carson was going to be here, I never would have spoke on this topic because he has infinitely more experience than me. But anyways, I want to start off by just giving a little bit of my professional history. So my software development kind of journey actually started in high school. It's not on the bullet points. I took a web design course and then 2 and 3 and 4 web design courses in my school. And I thought that I was the big man on the block because I could now code in HTML and CSS. So look out, world, I'm going to be the next big thing. But I did fall in love with the idea of telling a computer what to do by sending it lines of text. I also really enjoyed video games. So I thought, hey, I'm going to combine the two and become a game programmer. Went to college in Virginia, to a little liberal arts college. To give you an idea of how small it was, there was only one computer science professor the whole time I was there. We did everything in Java. The only time we didn't do that is when I had to learn assembly language for the compiler class and like one other class. So I didn't feel like I really got prepared for the industry from college, and I was in a bit of a low spot. There were no opportunities out in Virginia, so I begged my brother, who was working here in Utah as a software developer too, to just get me an interview with his company. It got me an interview with his CEO, and for some odd reason they liked me, and so they hired me. And they hired me at this little company called the Red X. It's out in Orem. Don't know if any of you know it. They make
Right by it.
Yeah. It's right off the freeway. They make software for real estate professionals. And I got there and I had taught myself JavaScript to get a job out here because, you know, I knew that out in Silicon Slopes, it's all web development. My brother talked to me about that. And I get there and they go, great, you know JavaScript. Go work on our backend API. It's written in a language called Erlang. And I was like, what the freaking heck? And then 6 months later, my big brother, who was working on the team with me, got a job at Google. And so he left, and I had to take over doing the front end back in the days of Angular 2, 4, whatever it was. And I kind of did everything. And my boss, he was the only other engineer. He kind of did deployment and development. And we had a really messy deployment strategy. See, everything was in virtual machines, Linux virtual machines. So you had to SSH in the virtual machine, and everyone just did everything in Vim. Well, when we wanted to deploy our product, which was a phone auto dialer, I was working on making it call more than one phone line at a time, but call 3 lines and handle it nicely. When we wanted to deploy our software, you had to SSH onto the server, the in-house server that had it. You had to PS aux and grep for the process ID that was running our program. You had to kill it with sudo, and then you had to pull down not the binary, but the full package from Git and build it there on the server in production mode. It was awful and horrendous. I can hear anybody working in DevOps just groaning at saying that. But
Greg, is that the worst thing you've heard? Okay, Greg says it's not the worst thing he's heard, so you're good.
Oh, okay, well, all right then. That gives me some small measure of hope, because I only felt shame about this. And the thing that I took away from this in my journey to command line is my brother and my boss would always talk about the mythical DevOps engineer. And we were always trying to hire a DevOps engineer. And I didn't actually know what that meant. But according to them, a DevOps engineer is someone who would take our whole complicated deploy process and they would make a magic tool. And with a single command line input, all our problems would be solved and we could deploy, we could manage our instance in production, we wouldn't have to SSH onto our server, like everything would be perfect. Well, I never got to see this mythical DevOps engineer. They didn't hire one while I was there. And instead, I went over and I became a contractor for a contract shop in Solution Stream. And my first contract was for a little known and tiny company called Qualtrics. And in Qualtrics, I got stuck on their DevOps teams. I know I'm just reading these bullet points to deal with it, but I got stuck on their DevOps teams. Specifically, I was on a team called SEAL. That was the acronym. And it stood for like, I know, sustainability. And then I usually forget the E and the L. I usually just like ergonomics, automation, and like lounging. So I forgot exactly what the acronym stood for, but the purpose of this is we were meant to be that mythical DevOps engineer. We were meant to automate everything for all the other teams so that way they could do their work. They could do what software engineers are good at, which is typing code, and we would clear the way for them to do everything else. And I started off writing just a couple of one-off scripts in Python and Bash. And then about 2 weeks into it, my boss finally showed up. I hadn't seen him this whole time, and that's a story at the end. And he had this tool. And this tool was the most awesome and just bad A thing I have ever seen. It could spin up a skeleton of a service and push it to GitHub automatically, and not just push to GitHub, but like create an entirely separate GitHub repo for it and then push it to GitHub. It could create an AWS instance, spin up the resources that you needed, and then manage it. It could control users' access credentials to the GitHub repo and to this AWS instance. Like, it was mind-blowing. And again, most of you are probably like, well, yeah, no duh, that's like the job. That's what we're supposed to do. But to me, it was like, holy freaking crap, I didn't know you could do this. Like, guys, I didn't know you could type things in a computer and it would actually do things with it. I thought typing was just for playing Age of Empires and making Word documents. And so I got to work on this awesome program, and I really fell in love with making tools for other engineers, helping clear other people's way to success in their own coding endeavors. And I fell in love with making command line interfaces and command line tools. So filled with this fire of passion, Qualtrics decided I wasn't smart enough to do my job, so they didn't hire me afterwards. And so I went back to Solution Stream and had to dust off my front-end skills and made a cryptocurrency app for a Japanese customer over in Japan. And then I joined Weave, and I told them, hey, this is what I love doing. I love helping out engineers. And they said, great, go steal data from our customers. And that is now my job. It's legal. Just disclaimer, if my bosses see this, nothing Weave does is illegal, but we have a bit business partnerships with other softwares, and they will let us access their database and their APIs. And my job is to write the software that gets that data from them and kind of cleans it up and formats it into something we can use and handle. So that is kind of my journey that brought me to this point. So what is a CLI and why do I like them so much? My brother, when he helped me out with a project back in college for homework, he gave me these words of wisdom that have always resonated with my soul. He said, the command line is good for your soul. And it's really true. Just so we're on the same page, I'm sure we all are. You guys have been doing this. You're smart professionals, but a command line interface, according to me, it's the typey. It's a program which we run by sending words, and it's usually configurable, and it runs other programs. And on Mac and Windows, you run it in terminals. Linux and Mac, you run it in terminals. Windows, you get the command line or the command prompt or the PowerShell, and nobody understands either of those, so nobody actually does it. And guys, I don't know if I'm coming on too hard, are coming off as fake, but I just really like the command line. Like, sometimes I don't like clicking so much. Command line tools, I like the typey, but they're lightweight, and so they usually run a little bit faster than maybe a memory intensive kind of GUI. But more than that, it seems from my little bit of experience that when you want to lock down what a customer can do, you make a GUI for them to try to control them. But when you want to enable someone to do something awesome, you write a CLI for them. And you don't actually have to be giving them power. That power can be an illusion, but it makes me feel like a powerful programmer to use the command line. And that's why I love them so much. So I'm going to talk about 3 of the command lines that I've worked on. The first one is Zord. Zord is Mariah asked, how did I end up giving this talk? Zord is the command line interface that I wrote to try to fix some problems that we were having in our team at Weave. I then had a pretty painful project. It took me about like 6 months on my own to do it. And it left me wanting a command line tool to handle a certain development inconsistencies. And so I made Arachne, and I think it's good enough to make it open source. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about this Qualtrics Cloud Cluster Manager that I worked with. So hey, go to the next one. Ah, that wasn't supposed to be there. Crap, that's embarrassing. So like I said, Zord is a reaction to anger and spite. But right now what it does is it fills 3 basic functions. Number 1, it creates a new interface for our software to connect to another partner's data source and get that data. We call that an integration. So it spins up a skeleton of that. It also, that same software, we call it the sync app. It will automatically, it'll do the legwork to version the sync app. And it also can delete corrupted data from our backend. And boy, am I glad none of our security guys are here for that one. So I'd like to start off by just kind of talk about each of these 3 functionalities and honestly do a little retrospective of them. I can't show you the actual tool running itself because it's Weave. It's hard-coded to Weave stuff. I don't know what I'm allowed to show from Weave, but I pulled out some of the logic examples to handle it. So the first problem, the new integration function. I kept seeing, I've been at Weave for 3 years. That's long enough to be an old man. And I kept seeing we would have a new programmer come into the integrations team, and we'd say, great, you're here. Go write a new integration. And they would say, okay, what do I do? And we go, just look at the sync app, look in this folder, and copy some stuff and figure it out. And so they would look, they would do what programmers are very good. They would read code, and then they go, okay, I think I got a handle on it. And they would start typing code. And I always watched, it was like clockwork. A new software engineer would finish up like one of our functions to get a certain data type, like appointments or patients. We usually sync with medical and dental software. They go, okay, I got that. But then when I used your guys' script to run it, labeled run_dev, it didn't work. It doesn't work. And we only do like a handful of new integrations each quarter. We're not like churning these out every other day. And so there's a couple of esoteric and hidden hoops you have to jump through to make it so our sync app will run your new integration. And between the crusty old people having to take themselves away from their assignments and remember how to get this stuff spun up and working, and the new guys having absolutely no idea what's going on, because this is a core legacy repo, which is ballooned to massive proportions, we would often lose an entire day. So my solution in Zord is it clones the latest version of the sync app into memory. It changes all the files in those in-memory files. It changes what it needs to be to create a new sync app, and then it pushes it back in a new branch. And so I'd like to share a little bit of that Git logic right now. I think it's pretty cool. There we go. So I hope this isn't. So, oh yeah, this code, this is you'll be able to download this example code if you want off of a public Git repository. There's a link to it at the end of the slide. This uses, I used a library called GoGit. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't change the functions names around very much. If you know what your Git commands are, you'll know what GoGit is trying to tell you to do. One interesting thing about it is you get this work tree. This work tree struct, and this is how you do everything. This is the representation of your file tree and your Git tree in the allocated memory for this program. I don't want to spend too much time going through this. I think it would be maybe a little insulting to y'all's intelligence. For how I updated the files, I did it the same way here and there. I scanned in the files as an array of strings and then just did pattern matching. You can do regex. You can do hard-coded looking for values like I did here as you loop through each of the lines. And then you write them out. You delete the old file, you write them out into a new file. And congratulations. What this code is meant to do, if you're a little confused by things, so I made this, I thought I would be cute with making this. I made it in Kingpin. And I thought, hey, what if the story behind this CLI was it's made for some people who are watching for the coming apocalypse, and they can order food, and they can update what the cause and time of the apocalypse is going to be, and then they can issue a command through a super secure channel. It's kind of silly, but we can at least give an example for running this Git example. So if we go here, oops. The command that I chose to go with is cool command. Apocalypse. And if we wanted to update like the cause and say like, I don't know, killer mermaids.
Can you make your terminal bigger?
Oh, it's not big enough?
I could see the VS Code, but I can't see the terminal. I think it's just the colors. There you go. That's beautiful.
Beautiful? Okay.
Also, don't kill us all because this could cause an apocalypse.
No. We're watching for it. We just haven't put in the date yet. Anyways, we click run. It runs in a couple of seconds. This is actually taking longer than it usually does. And then if we pull up here and go to our meetup example, we'll see, hey, we've got a working update. This is the RFC timestamp. It's how I just chose to generate the branch name. You can click and go compare pull request. And there we go. We are updating our cause to killer mermaids. This is how I set up the integration, the new integration functionality. And actually the next one is you just run it, you give it a name of the integration, and it just writes the files and directories that you need it to. There is one function that we have that is meant to detect when we're on a customer server and what their software is. Nobody ever uses it like that. So its alternate Blackmagic version is to force the sync app to use a specific integration that you've written, and what I wrote puts in the force option. You can always put in the other option later. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and close that down. Nobody cares about that. So, how much time do I have? Oh my gosh, I've talked so much. I'm so sorry, guys. So if we look at the analysis of just this function in Zord, it automates a process that is just stupid. Like, it's not technical. You're wasting an engineer's brain space by making them jump through these hoops. So just automate it. And the hoops you have to jump through are kind of tribal knowledge, which now get exposed if you look at the initial pull request. But you don't even need to have that tribal knowledge anymore. No one needs to remember it. No one needs to care. You just run the tool and it builds it. So what's bad? Well, the bad is we don't do this very often. So this tool doesn't really get run, like, at all. And the other bad has to come with what I chose, the name of Zord. Now, for those of you who don't know, a Zord is from the show Power Rangers. My son is obsessed with that. It's a giant fighting robot. And all your Zords can transform and combine into a Mega Zord, which is a mega robot. And I envisioned this CLI that I was making as a kind of mega app that collected all the scripts and all the garbage that we had to deal with on the integrations team and would just handle all of it through different commands. That's not very smart. You're going to end up writing a bunch of disparate code. Your code base is going to grow more complex than it needs to be. And command line tools, like, if you have a command line tool that does two wildly different things, then what's going to happen is everyone's going to use it for one thing, and they're going to forget about the other functionality. And so you wasted your time. And so split them out into two command line tools if they're both useful, and run it that way. So in the famous words of Sun Tzu, the functionality of this command isn't bad, but the vision for the CLI sucks. So then the next function that I want to talk about is update all. It does the same things that the new integration does, but it also updates the change log for our sync app. Because we have thousands of these sync apps running at any given time, and so we want to be able to version them to keep everything pretty consistent. So it builds the pull request, and then I wanted to use the GitHub API to just build a pull request and then send a Slack message with a button where you click the button and it merges the pull request, and then it just automatically shoots things out to our backend for the build and deploy. And what ended up happening, this is kind of a funny story. So this is an example of the Slack code. I accidentally stuck the app that I made for this. I stuck its token in this and then pushed to a public repository. And so Slack disabled my token and took my app away from my, so no demonstration on this one. Sorry about that. I've been really stressing about this. But Slack is just webhooks, and there's other stuff. They have an event-driven API. I didn't get to learning that, so no cool example for that one. Here's how you do a post request and go. Woohoo. So the analysis for the update all, or the update the version command. Oh, yeah. Buttons. Okay, we're good. Again, it automates a tedious process. You gotta you have to run a script, and the one-off script that we had previously was hard to use by admission of the guy who made it. And then you got to push, make the pull request, merge it, wait for it to build, go to a separate function, but the separate program is a web view app hosted in a Golang app that we don't have a public ingress to, so you got to port forward to it and open it up, and then you can click the buttons and all. This is meant to simplify all that to a single command. And it needs to be run more frequently. You version your software more often than you add new custom integrations or additions to your software. But that's also the bad thing about it. It needs to be run every Friday in the afternoon. So hopefully you heard me say that and you went, why the heck is this a CLI command? Why isn't it a cron job? And so what this is, apart from me never finishing it and never getting to V2, is this is a case of you're trying to hit a square peg in a round hole. So when you write CLIs, don't do what I did and make something a CLI because you just think they're so freaking cool and you love it. Like everything in our careers, pick the tool that's right for the job. So the last functionality in Zord that I'm going to talk about is the Zord Purge data. So we have these sync apps that are running, and sometimes data comes that's incomplete. There's a bug in the code. It makes it corrupted. We need to delete the data. Fine. How we delete the data is we send a signal to the sync app. And then the sync app sends a signal back to our back end and deletes the data. Well, if something happens to our sync app, maybe something's wrong with the Kubernetes pod it's running in, or the customer server that we've stuck it on is disabled or goes down, or they got rid of it. You have this really annoying disconnected sync app message, and you can't send signals to it. So you can't purge the data. But that's okay. You can delete the sync app, right? Except you can't delete the sync app unless the data is purged. And so we've got this awful catch-22 where if the connection goes down, there's kind of nothing we can do. Or at least that's what we tell most everybody else in the company. Turns out there is somebody, not me, promise it wasn't me, I just had it pointed out to me by another engineer. There's a little back door in our data service and a buried API. Usually you have to go through like 3 or 4 layers of edge APIs to get to this thing. Little tiny endpoint that lets you purge directly into the database, ignoring all this connection garbage. So I put this functionality in Zord. It port forwards to this service. It sends the delete request to this endpoint. And you only have to delete one tables. That's the thing. The endpoint deletes data by table. You only have to delete one table to delete a sync app. But if you want to be thorough and not leave orphaned data, which, ask like a data scientist or a machine learning guy about orphaned data and if it's a good thing. If you want to be thorough and delete the orphaned data, you need to go through 12 tables. So this is an example of the code I used for that. Okay, and this is built on the Kubernetes k8s.io library. The library is a bit of a beast. It's a bit of a pain. Our DevOps guys built a CLI that already does a magnificent job interfacing with this. Otherwise, there's like no other resources, so I wouldn't have been able to do this without, blatantly looking at their code to figure out how they did it and ripping off some parts of it. So thank you guys. But pretty much what you want to do is you want to grab your Kubernetes config in this create config function, and then you create kind of an in-memory digital config. And that digital config, there's a couple of different ways to build it. There is a way to build a config that's meant to be overridden, but when I dug into the library, that was deprecated. So this is hoping that the person you're giving the CLI to has actually configured their kube config properly and correctly. From the kube config, you can create a client set. This is the magic that you can start performing all these functions on. And then with your client set, you can create a port forwarder. And a lot of this is kind of black magic that you kind of just have to copy the lines of code, or at least that's what I found. But you end up hitting Kubernetes API for it. But the part that I found interesting is the channels. I had never had to work with channels before. But you can pass in 2 channels. Here I pass them in as part of my request, a stop channel and a ready channel. And this is how you can run your port forward concurrently with other functions when the port forward is set up and ready, it'll send an empty struct along your ready channel. And when you want to close it, you can either close the stop channel, or you can just return out of the go functions and defer the close until you return out. So that's pretty straightforward. There is this code for getting a pod. I don't want to show that, but where did I put the listener? Yeah. So here you have your ready channel. You do work. You can run this as a go routine itself, or you can just run it as a synchronous blocking function. Once you get a signal from a stop channel, you can pass the stop channel to other go functions. So here I actually pass it to do work. And once do work is done, you're going to pass the struct back. And we're going to exit out of this go routine. We're going to decrement our wait group counter. So this wait stops blocking. So we actually end up jumping down here, if my understanding is correct. And then with this defer functions, we're going to exit out of this return. But before we exit out, we close both our channels, and that closes your port forwarder. So no demo on this one either. I don't have a spare Kubernetes cluster lying around. I did have one last month, but I kept it running for too long and ran a bill that was much higher than my wife and I were happy with. So that got close enough.
Two things, Parker. One question, one comment. First thing, everybody's got a spare Kubernetes cluster. You can get K3S or K3D.
K3S.
K3D is K3S with the Docker wrapper. Like both of those, I'd highly recommend you look at. You're probably 2 seconds away from a little local Kubernetes cluster. So I always promote those two tools because they're amazing. Or even, what's the other one?
Minikube?
No, not Minikube. What's that other more lightweight?
The Kind.
Yeah.
Kind.
Kind's also pretty good. I like K3S more than Kind, but Kind's pretty great. Second one, port forward, is that a package you built, or is that something that comes out of Kubernetes? When you do new.
The port forward, so the actual port forwarder, it's something that comes out of the Kubernetes client.
Okay.
The only real package that I made that you can build off of here, or the only real struct that I did, otherwise this is pretty straight code, actually from some GitHub issues about how to port forward. The only thing that I did is made this kind of pod request that passed in your namespace, your service name, your port, and your channels for managing it. So, yeah. And I realized I did forget to scrub some names, but oh well, it doesn't matter. They won't be of anything to you. So that was the final thing that I made for Zord. And if we go back to presenting, I actually think this function was pretty good. It's about 3 or 4 times a week that I get asked from our application specialist, hey, can you purge and delete this sync app? It's disconnected. And I've finally got this thing running for him. The next time he comes to me, I'm ready. I've been using it on my own and it's been working. I'm ready to give it to him. So it's doing what CLIs are meant to do. It's making somebody else's job easier. It's clearing the way for them to have success. And it's making it so they don't come to you, which is, always an added bonus. It is automating a slightly complicated process. And the other thing that I really like about this functionality is it acts like a proof of concept. With just the understanding of run a port forward using Kubernetes IO, and then do work. Well, now there's a whole lot of work that you can do without having to create an ingress on a public API. Maybe you don't have to go through all that design and architectural documentation. You can spin up proof of concepts, annoying things people ask for really quickly. On the side, the bad things could probably use some security work. And it doesn't actually solve our purging data catch-22. It just band-aids it. It just kind of covers up the problem a little bit. But overall, I think this was actually a decent command that deserves to live on the command line. So I've gone through my 3 commands, and if you're anything like me, you look at that and go, well, that's a lot of bad. You pretty much said, I did these 3 things and 2 of them shouldn't exist on here. And the whole thing is awful. So what can I do to save my beloved Zord? Well, number one, I can give up the idea of trying to make it a Zord or a Mechazord, and I can just make it really good at one thing. But I can split out the new integration function into its own, because here's the thing. The new integration function, I forgot to mention that. I always forget to mention that when I was rehearsing. This new integration function wasn't just meant to help out new people. It was meant to be the starting point of generating code, and on top of it was supposed to be built an application that would look at our customer's schema, our partner's schema, and could map it back to our records. I really like messing around with Blender and the Unreal Engine, so I thought a node-based language would be a great way to do that. And we could have this thing where, you know, someone who's not an engineer can just look at these fields and values, and they can query the customer's schema to get example responses back, and then they can map it all over. And, you know, maybe if we're really clever, we can figure out some ways to automate the authentication schemes. And we can have this thing where instead of taking months to write integrations, you get 95% of the way done in, you know, a couple of hours, a little bit of poking around, a little bit of pinging the other person's schema and figuring it out. That's an awful command line interface. Like, that's a straight up, like, that's a graphics intensive. I hope you got a NVIDIA RX 10 billion. Like, it should not be a CLI. And so the whole idea from this new integration should not be in a CLI. Cut it, rip it out. Remove the update all and make it a cron job. It's run every Saturday in the afternoon, Friday in the afternoon. Should not be a CLI. Should not have to manually trigger this at all. And then reshape Zord into something that just does one thing really well. Some possible ideas I had are make it a tool which lets us have better data management. We could probably pull some reports when we have bugs. A lot of the times it is kind of some screwy data, but it's kind of hard to see our data. But Zord is now giving me functionality to maybe bypass some of our layers, and it can scan for these things and programmatically pick up maybe proactively when we're going to have a problem. Or we host a lot of our sync apps on Kubernetes, and I just showed you, you know, it's built on Kubernetes for the Purge functionality. So just expand that, and our sync apps don't behave the way like maybe other services that we've had. So make something that will let at least our on-call engineer not have to go through so many repetitive kubectl commands. Okay, so sorry. Before I go on, I promise I'm close to being done. Does anybody have any questions for me? Okay, great, wonderful. I don't actually have answers. So I had beginning of last year, I had this awful project, and I was a still relatively young engineer. Anytime that was before now, I was the young engineer, and that's why I was an idiot. And this project, I needed to implement a feature across like 6 or 9 services. It was an Edge API, forwarding a JRPC call to another Edge API, forwarding it to another Edge API, forwarding it to another Edge API. And so you just had this chain of abysmal things. And I think when I counted out, it's like 7 or 8 services. It changes every time. It was really scarring because it was kind of difficult. I wanted to be able to run it front to back and come back again, and monitor and log and watch and handle everything. But in order to do that, I would have to have a bunch of different services running on my computer in local development mode at the same time. I couldn't take advantage of, you know, nice things like node ports or port forwarding. So it got really old to make a code change in one repository, close down all my services, and then have to remember in exactly what order I had to spin them back up. So Arachne, I thought, well, what if there was a service that did like a weave or a tapestry of these services, and whenever the web got disturbed, it would respin the web, and it would take everything down and spin it all back up again. So I guess for any of you front-end guys, you're probably saying, hey, that sounds like npm start. That does sound like npm start. That's exactly what I was thinking of, just for multiple back-end microservices help. So here's an example of me running Arachne. So the code I want to look at is, so yes, it is made in Cobra. I've now shown you an example of apps made in Cobra and apps made in Kingpin. They're the same. Like, they're both easy to use. They're both great. Pick whichever one you prefer and stick with it. Facts 101 or tips 101. Anyways, so the data that I did, or oh my gosh, I'm going to take a drink, collect my thoughts real quick. So the code is just building off of the port forward channel deals that I dealt with. You start off with a wait group, you increment your wait group, and then you run your pool of nodes or your pool of services that you're going to run. You block this right here is just Golang blocking until it gets the close signal, which is Control-C or Command-C in the command line you're running it in. You get down into the pool. The pool reads in a config to build your cluster. It makes a couple of channels. It makes a message channel, because that was the other thing, is I wanted to be able to condense all the output from these 6 to 8 functions. I didn't want to have to keep looking through 6, 7, 8 terminals and going, I just wanted it to come in some semblance of an order. I realized you can't really enforce order, but in some semblance of an order, and just have it all in one terminal. So that's what this messages queue does. This messages queue also has the unfortunate job of signaling when the next service is ready to be spun up. The stop workers is something that each worker listens to, and when they receive it, they close themselves down. And the stopped is what they signal when they've closed down, to say, hey, I'm done. And our orchestrator can close the can close all the Go routines and then spin everything back up. So that's what this big, ugly nastiness is. One side note that's kind of interesting to look at is I send a signal that I thought for sure no one would ever send as part of their standard output ever, which is Eagle has flopped. So if any of my Go routines tells the messages, hey, the Eagle is flopped, that doesn't mean print Eagle has flopped. That means spin up the next worker and decrement and decrement our queue that is that's waiting, that it's waiting for workers to spin back up. When we receive a stopped message, we increment the number of workers that we have stopped, and if stopped workers equals the total workers, we return out of this Go function. On returning out, we decrement the wait group that we passed in. And then yeah, if we, and it will run. So I'm going to do a little example with Arachne now. There are 2 commands in it. All right, oh my gosh, what happened? Sorry.
Zoomed in a lot, maybe?
I zoomed in too much. Mariah, is this enough for you?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So if you run Arachne new cluster, that starts the process. It just gives you command line prompts. Each of these could be flags. I just haven't gotten to getting it to that point. There's a lot of work to be done on this CLI. You can set a cluster name. You set a node. This name will be a prefix to the output from the service running from this node. So that way you know where your output's coming from in your single mast one. I have this idea that some things you wanted to run are just like commands setting the environment. So they're one-offs and you don't need to listen for them changing. Some are services, some are daemons. Oh, yeah, let me share that. Oh, that's actually a cool thing. A watcher. We also spin up a watcher go routine. And this watches a directory and pings to get the size of the directory every second, which actually doesn't cause too many performance issues. I was surprised. And if the directory size changes, it sends the stop signal to tell everything to restart. So that's the two ways to restart the Arachne pool, is to save something, change a file size, or do Control-C. So you can do like daemon, execution command ls, execution arguments al, root directory, home. It'll ask you, do you want to create another node? No, this is just an example. And then if we go over here in set configs, you can see we made a nice little JSON. And I'm actually going to be using this JSON because I have little test services. Test service 1 and test service 2. Test service 1 is meant to be a command. It just kind of, actually it was the code I was using to experiment with the file size stuff, so it doesn't output anything. And test service 2 just kind of ticks. So if we run that, we get Arachne cluster up, name equals test. And you get it. It's starting worker 1. It returns from worker up because it was just a command. So that one sent a stop message. And then we're actually listening to test2 directory, and test2 is running, ticking, ticking, ticking. And if we go to test2 and we do something simple like undo that comment and save, we can see all workers have closed, ready for restart, and it restarted everything. So now I can run multiple services, work in one, and reliably close down and spin it up and have a single terminal output. So I was pretty proud of that. I am pretty proud of that. I like that. So the analysis of this little open source program, it condenses and simplifies complex systems. Don't know who works in microservices. I do a lot. I learned something doing it. I finally gained a full grasp on Go routines, channels, and wait groups. It's open source, so it's meant to help other people if they want. What it does wrong, it can be argued as far as like command lines go, that it doesn't really fix a problem. Like you can just run your services and clutter on your computer be damned. But so you can argue it fixes more of a pet peeve of mine. But maybe you might have merit for that. That is something to consider when you're making a CLI and really doing anything in software engineering is this a real problem or is this just a pet peeve? So the final takeaways, oh my gosh, I didn't put any animations on this. I have two stories for this first bullet point, and we're at the end here. The first story, make certain you have leadership buy-in and developer support when you do a CLI. So the leadership buy-in, when I was back at Qualtrics, that boss I talked about, I didn't see him for 2 weeks. So we had all these problems, but we would spend all of our time fixing the bugs for other developers' code. Because what happens in Qualtrics is their sales guys have absolute, complete, and total power. And so sales can promise anything to any customer to get the sale. And if a customer says, I love Qualtrics, but I'd really love it if your product did X. Sales will promise it. And then they had a sub-department of engineers. It was about like 300 or 400 people when I was there. It's the department I was in, dedicating to making custom instances of Qualtrics' software just for this customer. And this repository, they put all the custom instances into one repository. It was massive. It literally took 20 minutes to clone it from GitHub. I'm not exaggerating. If you had to wipe it or put it on a new computer, you type git clone, go to lunch, come back, and maybe it would be done finishing. Like, it was a nightmare to work with. It was a nightmare to maintain. And my team, even though we were a DevOps team, was in charge of maintaining it and fixing the customer's bugs. So we actually had 2 tech leads. One of them was in 10 hours of meetings with customers each day, just trying to fix bugs. No one was actually automating anything. No one was being a DevOps dude, because they were just fixing the bugs of this repo that we were in charge of. So my boss, my tech lead, would hide on the roof of Qualtrics for 8 hours a day. And that's where he coded up the bad ACLI. And the bad ACLI fixed this problem. It started breaking out this massive monolith into their own instances with their own management. We started attaching monitoring onto it. I made a cron job that listened to how much it cost us each month and then would email all the tech leads with what all the instances were costing. But because he didn't have leadership support, he literally had to hide on the roof of the office to avoid people and to avoid getting into meetings to solve a problem with his CLI. So if you're going to make a CLI to solve a problem, if you're going to do anything in software engineering, make certain you get leadership support. Otherwise, you're on your own. And as far as development,
on the roof? Was there internet on the roof?
You found a spot that had internet, yeah.
Okay.
And I knew of one other engineer who would go up there with him, so there was bound to be something up there.
It's Starlink.
And actually, with the developer support, I have another personal story with that. And maybe I'm wrong, but I can remember our DevOps guys made something very similar to what I worked with at Qualtrics. I think I'm allowed to say it's called Bart. I can remember when Bart was a little baby Bart, and Andrew got up and he said, "Hey, I made this tool. It'll go and it'll get your Google container repo. It'll get your image tag, your build tag, so you can deploy your service." And I sat there and I went, "Great, looks cool." And then I went right back to doing what I'd always done, which was click on the GitHub actions, click into Jenkins, scroll through the Jenkins output, and grab the hash where I knew it would be, and then use that until I kept doing that for like a month and a half until our previous chief architect, saw me doing that, and he was not okay with that. And he made me stop doing what I was doing and use this nice, wonderful tool that DevOps had made for us. Did I have a thing against DevOps? No. Was their tool bad? No. It was just different from what I was already doing, and I was comfortable. And when a developer is comfortable, they don't change. So when you make a CLI, you're trying to solve a problem for someone, but you're trying to solve it in a way that's maybe a little bit different than what they were already doing to work around the problem. So you kind of got to sell people on it. You kind of got to get developer buy-in to use this product in the CLI that you're doing. Zord, I didn't introduce this term earlier, but I have a term for CLIs where it's just a big garbage dump and they just collect functions that are meant to do everything under the sun. It's an interstellar Swiss Army knife goat. And always remember that colonizing Mars and mowing your lawn should be separate things. You can colonize Mars in one CLI and mow your lawn in another CLI. Don't combine the two. It'll just give you a headache. Don't go out to make sed. Sed is a wonderful command. It's a powerful command. There is a joke in the industry that no one actually understands it. It's also a very complicated command that has a lot of depth. If you set out to make something with the depth and complexity of sed, you're probably going to burn yourself out. Start small, get a satisfying victory in, and it might grow to be said, but don't set out to make said, is my personal advice. Another thing is you don't need a good reason if you're learning. If you just want to make a CLI and there's an area of code that maybe something in Golang you don't understand very well, or just something in programming, whatever, computer science, whatever you don't understand, make it, go for it. Like, that's all the reason you need to do something cool. Another strong use case for CLIs we've talked about a lot is automating processes, which maybe are a bit more complicated than just being a one-off Python or Bash script. Another good one is start off as a proof of concept. Start off with that one function that does the one thing that you know you can do, but can be built and expanded upon with other functions to really fulfill a strong product role. And don't worry about framework or library. If an idiot like me can make CLIs in both Kingpin and Cobra, you guys are going to be just fine. So just pick whichever one looks nice. They both have great documentation. They both have really strong communities surrounding them who have made quite a few tutorials online, answered quite a few questions online. So don't get scared or intimidated or analysis paralysis. They're both fine. Just pick one and go with it. And yeah, that's everything I wanted to share. Here's a link to the CLIs that I demoed and the open source dependencies, this meetup examples. You can use the code as a baseline for any cool CLIs you want to do. Arachne, if you want it to do something and want to contribute to it, I'm happy. This is my first open source thing I've ever done, so I don't know what I'm doing here. But if you want to check it out, this is the dependencies that I relied on for it. And yeah, I guess the final thing I would say is I hope I didn't blow anybody's mind. I'd be a little worried if I did, but I hope the field of computer science is really big and really vast, and it's easy to sometimes get burned out or discouraged. But if you take an example from me, like, there is a thing to get passionate and excited about and enjoy. And I found my thing. I love helping other developers. I love doing things from the command line. I love writing command line tools. But if you haven't found it, then your passion is somewhere out there too. And go get it. Go have fun getting it. This job can be stressful, but it's meant to be fun. Software engineering is meant to be fun, and I truly believe it can be. And I'm going to stop with the sappy crap. It's open discussion time. Ask questions, throw popcorn at me, whatever.
Parker, Jason has a question for you.
When are you switching to Vim?
I did my time in Vim, 1.5 years.
So you're going to Emacs, command line style, right?
Yeah, no. I just thought I would just, type in zeros and ones directly on my motherboard.
Stuart had put a good comment in the chat.
Stuart.
Jensen, I just need to open the dang thing.
He's right.
I can just go ahead and.
Say, yeah, I just wanted to read it for the recording purposes.
Stuart can iterate it.
The recording talking, not the chat. Yeah, so go ahead if you would just say that, Stuart.
Yeah, so if you check Kingpin in GitHub, you'll see that its creator no longer actively maintains it. He created a replacement called Kong. I used to be a Kingpin user. I've moved to Kong. It's just as nice and in some ways nicer than Kingpin.
Is it still? I don't see. And I haven't used Kong. My reason I love Kingpin was its simplicity. I felt like I kind of just looked over Kong and it looks almost too much like Cobra to me. Like you know what I mean? Like I like Kingpin because how fast and easy and quick it was. Like I didn't want to build anything super fat and complicated with it. But for small things, it felt easy. Kong looks like it's just adding more cruft.
It takes a little bit longer to figure out a pattern that you might like using. But in my experience, after that initial road bump, it's just as easy. So I guess that's a way of saying, yeah, if you haven't used Kong before, it is a little bit harder than Kingpin. Not significantly harder.
So you say it's somewhere between Kingpin and Cobra. Like, I love Cobra, but there's a lot there for like,
Yeah.
you're just trying to fill the gaps on what the normal flag package doesn't do for you in Go, which is a lot. It's fine, but it's really not enough of a lot of anything nuanced.
Honestly, what Kong needs most is just a better demo, because I don't think that the default usage that he demos is the easiest way to use it.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, thank you. I forgot all about that. I vaguely remember seeing that, but they're not taking Kingpin down though. He's just not going to add to it.
Right. He's even accepting MR or pull requests, but he just doesn't appear to be doing releases anymore. So instead of your nice clean import like you've got there, you'd have to actually go in and pick your Git SHA that you want.
So Parker, what do you feel like? Explain to me what the hardest thing you think is about writing a CLI. You've written several now. Like, what part do you think is the hardest to deal with?
Honestly, the hardest thing with writing a CLI, from what I've seen, well, that's kind of two parts. Number one is just picking a problem that fits a CLI. Like, anytime you go to solve a problem, you're faced with, how am I going to solve it? You can do a GUI, you can do a one-off script, you can do a backend service with servers and all sorts of complicated, gnarly logic and data structures. You can build a CLI. Recognizing a problem that deserves to be solved with a CLI, for me at least, is the hardest one. But I've been wanting to make CLIs ever since Qualtrics. I've been looking for excuses to make CLIs. And as we saw in my demonstration, I made a CLI where some of its functions don't deserve to be in the CLI. And so that's the first hardest step. The next hardest step, honestly, is working out. And this is something that I wanted to allude to, but I didn't. That both Bart and what I did back in Qualtrics did really good, but what I haven't done with these meetup examples is coming up with a elegant distribution system. It's kind of understood that developers use CLIs, so you're not making this for like someone in marketing, but still it's kind of clunky to be like, hey, download the Git repo and run this make command, or go build and go install, instead of like just being able to have the binary and just being able to say like, hey, do a curl request to put the binary right here in the bin. For me, figuring out the scaffolding needed for an elegant distribution system, I mean, I haven't figured out how to do it yet, so for me that's the hardest.
I would point you to Go Releaser to solve that problem. There it is.
All right.
It's really great. It's it's in a lot of ways a solved problem. You drop a config file in that describes how to build your application and how you'd like to have it distributed, and it can do auto tagging and GitHub releases and distribute binaries to Brew, or it's straight to GitHub, or all sorts of methods. So.
Can you say Venmo Spencer $100? Just
To see if that comes up.
Pops up. Cool.
That's great. No, you're right. I think even though we boiled it down with Go, you boil it down to like often a single binary, right? Not technically speaking always, but I mean, that's a lot of the power. You still have to get that somewhere. So. Cool. Yeah, thanks for speaking. I will also point you in a second thing, since we're here and you went over your code. FS Notify has a native package for Go, and is probably what you want to look into for your file watching instead of pulling for directory size to compare. So this is more. You didn't ask for code review, but there it is.
Okay, I'm taking notes right now. This has
Never
been
met
a
a piece of
learning
code I didn't
experience for
review,
me.
so.
Because if you had erased something and then put the same amount of characters, it would
Yes.
each character is the same amount of kilobytes or whatever, or bytes or whatever.
Yep.
It would be interesting.
Yeah, so FS Notify has been built into the Linux kernel and I think it's on Mac as well.
So iNotify is what it uses. FS Notify is a wrapper around iNotify and whatever Mac calls it and whatever Windows calls it, because they all have their own versions of like, hey, tell me when something changes in the file system.
Yeah, it's like the kernel hooks, right? Like basically the kernel says like this changed, here you go, and you subscribe to you have to subscribe to like every file individually, which is always
You
interesting.
subscribe to a directory and then believe you get everything underneath, but it's, it differs for and I think
The
Linux
interface
has
is
a
cool
new
enough.
version they're coming out with too, because there's like, it doesn't scale really well right now.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. Like, if you ever get complaints, like, all of us have to, on Linux anyway, up our max open file limits, or your editors just freak out on you because they can't watch every file.
Yeah, that's what Visual Studio Code is doing for you, is
Yeah.
setting up the notify.
If you want examples of that, you can look at no one else here can look at this, but you can, Parker. Bart Run has watches based on FS Notify built in.
Okay, all right.
But if everybody else, the examples in the FS Notify package, if you just Google go FS Notify, it's not too complicated. They give you a channel and you read from the channel, it tells you what events happened, and you can kind of basically get instantly notified if a file change you're looking at.
And then forever on, whenever you see someone doing a polling system like that, you can say, you should use iNotify.
Yeah, you can be just like me and really obnoxious and
So a little bit of self-advertising here. Alternatively, those of you that are familiar with Facebook's Watchmen, so if you've done front-end development, like React, I have a library that is a Go API for communicating with Watchmen. The big advantage of Watchmen, if you're already using it is going to be lighter on your system, since you've got Watchmen handling all of the kernel resources and routing and so on, instead of every little application doing their own iNotify subscribes.
I've never even heard of Watchmen, maybe because I'm not a front-end developer.
I haven't updated the library in a while, but if I find that I have users that are actually taking active advantage of it, that might change.
I mean, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I was thinking that it's kind of a generic. So it does these watches and gives you some sort of API that you use against it.
Yep.
Okay,
Oh, nice.
that makes sense.
Why am I not developing on Twitch and having all these nerds be like, hey, by the way, you're doing it wrong? Like,
You're writing something
It
that's already
actually
been
gets really annoying and people troll you really fast.
would it be annoying though? Because I'd be like,
Yes,
oh,
it
you just
is. I
saved
develop
me
on Twitch
8
and
hours.
people just sit there and troll you.
Okay.
No, some people give beneficial advice. Some people are actually nice and funny, and some people are just straight up rude and say, I work at Google. I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm like, shut up and leave. If you don't like it, you don't have to listen to me. Yeah, I'm just saying. But I've made $5, so program on Twitch.
Professional
Yeah,
Twitch streamer.
I think I've made more money from Twitch than I ever made from YouTube.
Go
All right, do we
subscribe
have
to
any more
Miles
questions
Twitch.
for Parker before I end the recording?
Okay, I just want to, can we just clap again? That makes.
I think we can.
Okay.